Good morning, everyone. I am Mark Connell, the founder and CEO of nuBound, and I'd like to welcome you to our very first nuBound interview. Our inaugural guest is a good friend and fellow Western Pennsylvanian, Jack Fultz. Jack came to prominence in the running world in the 1970s. He won the Boston Marathon in 1976 and qualified 3 times for the Olympic trials. More recently, Jack has spent the last 30 years coaching and fostering the Dana Farber Marathon Challenge team, which over the course of that time has raised over $100 million for cancer research. In his spare time, Jack was a professor of sports psychology at Tufts. Jack, welcome to nuBound.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks for having me. Wonderful to be here and sitting outside on a beautiful summer morning. Feels more like fall or spring. It's the temperature finally has broken for a little while, although we're expecting 90 tomorrow again. But great to be with you. Thanks a million.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've finally gotten some nice weather this weekend here in Boston.
We have, yeah. So let's take full advantage of it. Ride my new mobile device here.
Yeah. Well, so we were talking when we finish here, you're about to head off and pick up a new bicycle.
Yeah. I don't run much anymore. Replaced hip 2 times over. It's a long story that I won't bore you with. But so I bike, and I was biking a little bit more and more so as my running got less and less. And then finally, I pretty much ended running in my life for a long time and biked almost exclusively as my main aerobic exercise. And I go to the club, of course, and throw some weights around. I stretch all the time. So to keep myself moving and fit and whatnot. But biking has been it for me. And I ride a couple of big fundraising bike events every year, or one in particular. And I've gone over to Europe a handful of times with good friends to do some nice serious climbing through the Dolomites or the Alps or the Apennines in outside of Rome. So it's been fabulous. And last month I had a little bit of a mishap. Went down, got cut off by a driver. Fortunately, we were all going pretty slow, so I went down, but I broke my handlebar off on my quadricep. I mean, that stung for a little while. And I took the bike in for repair, and they discovered a crack in the frame, the carbon fiber frame. And we don't know whether it happened in that mishap because the bike did not go down hard at all. But they just expected that it's cracked. So it's, you're riding a time bomb waiting to go off in some catastrophic way when you're careening down a hill 40 miles an hour. So you can't use a bike like that. So I've been anticipating buying a new one anyway. And again, not to belabor this, but I've gone through the whole vetting process of what bike and people who buy bikes at this level and above and probably even below end up buying a lot more bike than they really need, to get the end. And it becomes about wants, not needs per se. And there's a book out on biking called titled Rules, RULES, and one of the rules is how many bikes should a biker own, and the answer, of course, is N+1, N being the number of bikes you currently own. So you never get rid of bikes; you just keep adding to the inventory. Well, nature took one away from me, so I'm adding one to it. I'm looking forward to it. It's
You're getting back to N. Now that you've been at N-1 for the last month, you're getting back to N.
Yes, exactly. Yes, precisely. Good math. That's the new math.
There we go. Sounds good. Well, I wanted to start today talking about your competitive days. You grew up in Western Pennsylvania and played sports in high school like every boy who grows up in Western Pennsylvania. You played football in the fall. Can you take us through your career from going from high school through college and how you became really? You're one of the elite runners in the world. How did you become an elite runner?
Well, thanks. Yeah, as you say, like you, Western Pennsylvania, small town. The NW stands for Northwest Pennsylvania, but the people who live there say it stands as much as nowhere. So because there's, it's nestled between Pittsburgh and Erie, about equidistant between the two. So it's it's not coal country per se, but it was always part of the coal industry. So the major employer back then was a company called the Joy Manufacturing. They made coal mining machinery. My father had his entire work life centered around working there, and I worked there on summer jobs, which leads to an interesting side story on running, but I'll come back to that if we have time later. But so I grew up, as a youngster delivering morning newspapers. I delivered the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette 6 mornings a week, Monday through Saturday. Up
I know
at
it well.
6 o'clock, and you're out on your bicycle, single-speed Schwinn Tornado bicycle, biking up and down the hills of northwestern Pennsylvania. And I thought I was just delivering newspapers. Turns out I was getting a good hour-long workout every morning aerobically. And I'm the youngest of 4 boys in my family, and all my older brothers were athletes. So, of course, I had to follow suit, and now there's a bit of a legacy with a family name. So I had that to sort of uphold as well. And in reflecting back on it, I suppose there was a little bit of pressure there to have to show up and do the job. So I played football and basketball and ran track in the spring. Of course, we didn't have cross country in the fall, and I loved to run. And because I was building this aerobic base and playing neighborhood games of running around for hours on end, because of that aerobic fitness I got from the morning newspaper delivery, I could run all day long and tire much less quickly than everybody else. And I guess I had just enough speed to have that as well. Obviously not super fast, otherwise I would have been a miler. There's an axiom in competitive running: nobody races any further than they absolutely have to. So if you're successful at a marathon, it may be a testament to how slow you might be on the track. But I say that tongue.
Well, not to mention ultra marathoners who a friend is an ultra marathoner who and his summary was, I really like these ultra marathons because everybody runs so slow.
They do. They're pretty amazing people. And it's interesting, ultra events and ultra running, I suppose in particular, the long distance swimming, like English Channel stuff. I mean, you're really in a cocoon when you're mentally and whatnot. In running, you get into one, but it's different. You're still, interacting with nature, with the larger nature. You're able to look around, see things happening and whatnot. But these people obviously really get into a zone, and the more challenging something appears to be physically, the participants will tell you that the limiting factors are much more mental. The old Yogi Berraism: 90% of this game is mental, the other half is physical. And I use that a lot with our runners, because it's so true. The limiting factors, especially when you start getting tired and you want to give up, the body still has a lot more in reserve than we realize. So a lot of it has to do with the conversation that we're carrying on with ourselves, which is true in almost everything in life, right? So, but it really gets exemplified in challenging activities.
Yeah, well, it's true in sports, and it carries over. It's also true in life.
It is, absolutely, yeah. It's very much a universal phenomenon. So anyway, back to my high school days. So I was, I had just had more success with running than I did the other sports. I was too small really to be any good in football. I was certainly not going to play small college football anywhere, most likely. Basketball, I probably liked basketball practice in the games more than any of the other sports. I mean, we just play basketball and we do drills, and I, again, because of my fitness, I could do the drills all day long and tend to excel a little bit. So that was always nice. And I love to play, but I by my junior year, I think I was going to be second string on the high school basketball team. So I went down to our local YMCA, and we had a small town league there, and I got to play 3 games a week and through the winter, and we'd play the whole game. So that was where I ended up going, and we had some good teams, and it was a lot of fun. I loved it, and it kept me fit. But track again was where I was able to excel and knew that I would, and I was doing things that were somewhat unconventional, areas that had good coaching and good instruction from from where the coaches had running experience themselves in college and whatnot. They knew the value of going out and running 20, 30 miles a week, building a nice aerobic base from a running standpoint. None of my track coaches had that base. They were football, former football players and whatnot, and they didn't.
They were repurposed.
Oh, repurposed, exactly. I mean, I remember them telling me, "Look, you're kind of wasting your time going out and just doing this long, slow distance stuff." But I enjoyed the process as well. And I had a few friends who did some more reading even than I did on it, and said, "No, you got to do this stuff. It'll pay off in big dividends, going forward." So anyway, so I had some success in high school, set a couple high school records. We went to the state championships, and so running was it. And so my goal coming out of high school athletically was to try and get a college scholarship for my running. I thought that would be a hallmark of success for me.
And you ended up at Arizona State.
I started at the University of Arizona in Tucson. Yeah, the Wildcats. That's all right. And it was fabulous. I mean, I had a great time. I was there for 2 years, and but I was a walk-on. The coaches weren't about to give me anything. When I walked in, said, "Hi, I'm Joe Schmo from Pennsylvania, and I'd like to go out for the track team." And I started mid-year, actually. So this was second semester, and track season was about to begin in January, February. We're out in Tucson, Arizona, so the weather's really nice. Everyone's out running T-shirts and shorts and whatnot. So the coach listened to my story, listened to my times, and said, well, he kind of realized, as John Parker started his book, Once a Runner, said everybody was a 4:34 high school miler. And that's exactly what I was. I was a 4:34 high school miler, which was pretty good in northwestern Pennsylvania, to win the second championship or make you competitive, get you to state meet. And not going to win state by any means, and no one's going to come knocking on your door. So such was the case for me. But so I started very, inauspiciously as a walk-on, and but the runners were great on the team. They welcomed me with open arms. Come on, yeah, let's go for a run. Come with us, and they showed me the ropes. I learned a lot, and I just kept showing up, and so
becoming part of the community.
Very much so. Yes. Yeah. So my second semester was now the fall of the following year. And for the first time at that very year, the NCAA changed their ruling. There was a rule prior to that freshmen were not eligible for varsity sports across the spectrum, but they changed that ruling and said, okay, for minor sports, which other than football, baseball, basketball, which were the major sports, and hockey in certain parts of the country, that was still the rule, that freshmen were not eligible for varsity, so they had to have freshman teams. But in the minor sports like cross country, freshmen were eligible. And I had never run cross country. As I said, we didn't have it in high school. So lo and behold, I'm there, and now the coaches knew me, the athletes certainly knew me, and we were all back in school. And so I just started running with them, and I had been building a base, and I just kept showing up, and and they put me in all the races. At the end of the season, they added up all the points, and I was seventh man on the team. So in cross country, the top seven guys, first five score, and then the next two, sixth and seventh place, they are what are called displacers. So if I'm the seventh man on my team, but I beat the fifth place guy on a competing team, that pushes him back one place and gives him more points. And in cross country, low points team scores. So if you finish 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you add those up and you have a low number, right? And so the objective is to get the lowest score you possibly can. Interesting. So anyway, as a displacer, I was the number 7 man on the team. So you
were scoring points for Arizona.
Yes. So, and occasionally I think I probably finished in the top 5 for the team. The point being, though, that I was awarded a varsity letter jacket. And here I am now. I'm a big man on campus. A school like University of Arizona, big D1 school.
Sure.
So if you have earned a varsity leather jacket, and of course it's always warm over there, so the occasions to wear a leather sleeve leather jacket are few and far in between. That didn't stop me. I wore it, and if it was below 70 degrees in the morning, I was wearing my jacket. And just felt so proud to this day. I mean, I feel very proud that kind of came out of nowhere. And it was it was a big step in acknowledgement of my running for myself. It validated me, so to speak, that I was on the right path, and this might lead somewhere. So then the following year, same thing. I ran track in the spring. I didn't letter, but the following year in cross country, I lettered again. I moved up. I was fourth or fifth man, and so by that point, I was now beating some of the guys who were on scholarship, and it was costing me money to be out of state tuition. So it wasn't much by today's standards at all. It's just a rounding error. I mean, I think the tuition was $500 a semester or something.
A little different from the current pricing.
Yeah, but as I said, I was next to youngest of 7 children. My parents were blue collar workers and working 2 jobs each to feed us and clothe us and get us out of the home and into school, and so every penny really counted. And so I was beating guys on scholarship, and I requested from the coach. I said, "Can you give me some financial assistance?" And he said, "I would, but all the scholarship money we have is allocated to the current runners. So, when something opens up, we'll be more than happy to do it." But that wasn't quite enough for me. And number 2, being from back east, I had friends who were running in colleges back on the East Coast, and they said, "You should come back. You should come back here and run. You'll be a bigger fish in a smaller pond, and we'll get to see each other a little bit more and all of that." So I did that. I applied to a small school back in Ohio, and I got accepted, and the coach was going to give me scholarship. The whole thing was all set. Well, this is 1969. So I reluctantly left Arizona. I loved it out there and had a great time, but I was going back, and the school I was transferring to was a school in the quarter system. So I was out of classes for about 3 months until I started in the third quarter in March, whereas my first semester at Arizona ended in December or January, where I had to go back and take exams. Regardless, so I'm out of school for 3 months. This was during the Vietnam War, and every 18-year-old male in the United States had to be registered with the Selective Service, and they were drafting everybody they could find. And if you didn't have a college deferment or a family deferment or a job deferment or a medical deferment, bone spurs, for example, you were draft eligible. So I ended up getting drafted. You had 30 days to appeal your classification. They reclassified me because I was out of class, and I never did anything about it, thinking I'll be in school before anything happens. So I just didn't worry. I didn't read the fine print.
How could anything bad happen?
Yes, exactly.
I'm just between semesters here.
Right. So anyway, so I got drafted. I remember it to this day. It was a Saturday morning, just like now. My mother got the mail in the morning and said, "Jack, you got something here from the Selective Service office." And I'm wondering what was all about. I'd already taken my physical. I tried to use a football injury that almost ended my career from high school. I had a big calcium deposit. I ended up in the hospital and whatnot, and they were lucky enough to dissolve it. That's a long story in and of itself. But anyway, I tried to use that. I said, I may still have some calcium in my quadricep here that from an old high school football injury.
Undoubtedly.
And, so they x-rayed it right there. And the doc came out and said, "Well, I've got good news and bad news." He said, "The good news is you don't have any calcium in your leg, and the bad news is you don't have any calcium in your leg, which means you're eligible for
your 1A
draft. You're a 1A, exactly." So I was in school at that time when I took it. He said, "But if you're out of school, they'll reclassify you, reclassify you." So anyway, I got drafted. And this is 69, the year after the Tet offensive, and they were taking everybody. Well, Arizona was also a land-grant college, so all freshmen, sophomore men were required to take ROTC, Reserve Officer Training. So it was bizarre, to be on a campus like that when there was so much unrest going on, a lot of protest against the war. There were racial, demonstrations starting that got even more heated. But that was really the era that all of that was happening. And
1969 was kind of the height of things.
It was, exactly. Yeah, you remember it. And
it was the summer of Woodstock.
It was,
among other things.
And I fast forward, I could tell you, I was in the service and I was in training in New York City, in electronics school in New York City when Woodstock happened, and I didn't have the wherewithal to be able to take the weekend off and go over to Woodstock. But friends of mine who were also in training there in the Coast Guard did. So to this day, I regret having not done whatever I needed to do to get that weekend off. But that's another story. So anyway,
so you ended up in the Coast Guard.
I ended up in the Coast Guard, and I talked my way in actually, and it was because of that ROTC. So it turned out to benefit me. And then I had a couple of years of college under my belt. So the recruiter bumped somebody off the list, put me on, got me in. We jokingly say I could never run for president because it's a skeleton will come out of the closet. Once you were drafted, you weren't allowed to enlist in any other branches of the military. The only thing you could do was add a third year to your Army obligation, with hopes of getting a duty station that might be out of the war zone. So good luck with that. So, but the Coast Guard was under the Department of Transportation at the time. And now it's under Homeland Security rather than Department of Defense. So they could not send us to. You had to volunteer if you wanted to go into a war zone. So there were a lot of guys in the Coast Guard who were there simply because they were going to get drafted and they didn't want to go to Vietnam. Nobody wanted to go to Vietnam. We didn't belong there. It wasn't like, I could get into the whole political aspect of why we were there. And, if anyone's read any of the history on it, those who have know that it was an unjust war. And after the fact that those were involved with sending young American men over there. And, there were far, far fewer women in the military then. And certainly they weren't sending any who were into war zones. But anyway,
so,
and not to,
so you ended up in electronics school in New York, but eventually found your way down to DC, to Annapolis.
Not to Annapolis, to Washington D.C. after my training, and I was running every day. I was running. I'd go out after electronics school on Governor's Island in New York, and it was 2 miles around that island, and it was beautiful scenery. And I'd go out and run 10 miles or whatever every night, just staying fit. And it was my own mental escape from military life as well. So then after school, I had my choice of billets. I could have ended up as an electronic technician. I could have ended up on a ship. I could have ended up in the Aleutian Islands because long-range aid to navigation was one of the primary tenets of the Coast Guard. And so they sent electronic technicians to keep all the electronic gear, all this old stuff in repair. And so these guys, we all ended up, they said 2 of your years, you're going to end up on the Aleutian Islands or some tiny little remote spot or on a ship. And I was not looking forward to that. But my first 2 years, or the next 2 years after school, was I ended up on a radio station outside of Washington, D.C., Alexandria, Virginia. And I was fortunate. I was still running on my own. And Washington, D.C. had a very well developed, especially for that time, running community. And every week there would be a road race somewhere, some weeknight or on a weekend, Saturday morning. They would have a little 2-mile run for your life. That was a national campaign that was going on then, probably commensurate with President Kennedy's, the President's Council on Physical Fitness.
Right. Yeah.
And so there was a movement afoot to be pushing, citizenry to get out and exercise. So it was 2-mile run for your life. And then they would have that every week, and then they'd have another race of different, an 8 or 10 miler, maybe a 2-person relay, different things, and then those longer races kept building through the year, leading up to a February marathon. Leading up in 1971, so I was running these races every weekend and getting to know the running community and learning more about running from them and from the different guys I would meet and train with. And again, just kept showing up, as the expression goes, life, 90% of life is just showing up. And so I just kept showing up. And in the process, I kept getting better and better and fitter. And the better you get, the better you want to get. So all that motivation. So I kept running all these races for the next couple of years. And I finally started running against some of the Georgetown University runners in the DC area who, between their seasons, between cross country, indoor and outdoor, some of the guys were road runners. And they'd come to these same road races, and I finally met them, and I'd lock horns in competition, and we'd be racing each other. Finally got to know them. They invited me over to campus, meet the coaches, and do some training with them. So that was how it all evolved. And that was how I ended up at Georgetown. When I got out of the service in 73, and I had run a couple marathons while I was in the Coast Guard.
And you won your first marathon there in the DC area.
I did, yeah. It was called the Washington Birthday Marathon. I got some good kudos from it because there happened to be nothing going on in the D.C. area sports-wise that weekend. So they ran this race, and I ran in a Coast Guard. I made my own Coast Guard uniform. Coast Guard wasn't giving me a lot of support. Just my executive office gave me time off to train and go to races, but there was no budget to get nice Coast Guard uniform. So I stuck letters, Coast Guard, on my shirt. Half of them fell off in the race. So the media, after winning the race, inquired, and what did that say? So when it made it into the Washington Post, on the front page of the sports section, and it was a 3-day weekend. It was called President's Weekend then, Washington's birthday and Lincoln's birthday are two separate weekends. Now it's called President's Weekend or something, and they combined them. But back then it was two separate. So anyway, guys at headquarters, at Coast Guard headquarters across the river in D.C., read this in the paper, and they said, "Wow, we didn't know we had a coastie."
They said, "Who is this Jack Fultz guy?"
Exactly. Yeah. So they invited me over, and we spent all day with these guys, and they were about my age. They had graduated from the Coast Guard Academy, young officers stationed there at headquarters, and we just spent all day chatting, talking about running and whatnot. And so when I was leaving, they said, "Look, we'll put your rotation papers in special services. So as long as you keep running, stay healthy, and represent the Coast Guard." And it's up to your executive officer, your commanding officer, your base as to how much support they might give you. But as long as you keep doing this, you won't end up on a ship or out in the remote island somewhere.
You became a sponsored athlete in Washington, D.C.
Ostensibly, I did, yes, right. And so getting to know all the Georgetown people, and so back then, and I think it's probably still the case now, if you go into the military, your NCAA eligibility, which usually is a 5-year window, you have 5 years to complete your 4 years of eligibility in the NCAA, but the clock stops if you're in the military. So my clock stopped. So now I get out of the service. I was 24 years old, and I still had two years of eligibility, 3 years actually in indoor track, and 2 years I used up at Arizona in cross country and track. So I had 2 years left. So Georgetown recruited me. My plan was to go out to California, Santa Barbara. I wanted to go to UCSB and learn how to surf. And run and take up life in California. And I was young and stupid and just wanted to have a good time, but I was still running hard. And anyway, Georgetown gave me a full ride, and because I was running now at a level where I could run with those guys, but I had to get my speed back because I was putting in a lot of miles and didn't do a lot of speed work. It was all geared toward road racing and marathoning. And so I worked on my speed, worked on my stride, changed that, and was running with guys who were a lot faster than me, 4-minute milers and whatnot. So that helped. And so for the next 3 years, I was back on the track, indoor and out, and running cross country, and but I never achieved quite the success I wanted to at Georgetown. I never made All-America, and never, didn't really come close to winning an NCAA championship, although it was in my mind to do. But I always ran extra mileage. I was still going out on weekends that we didn't have competition, running long runs because it was in my DNA now.
So you had your eyes on qualifying for the Olympic marathon, the Olympic trials in the marathon.
I did. I had qualified and ran the trials in '72 when I was in the Coast Guard. Again, it was only my second year of marathoning. I didn't know what I was doing. It was out in Eugene, Oregon. Had a great time. I spent a whole month on the West Coast running in some military competitions. They took us up to Seattle to the national championships, which I didn't run, but I was there to train, and then went down to Eugene, Oregon for the Olympic trials. It was the days of Steve Prefontaine and George Young and Jim Ryan, and it was a fabulous time. But I was a real neophyte. I was in awe of all these guys and looking around. But I was learning a lot. I was absorbing everything I could. Unfortunately, I got real sick the week before my race. I was in bed for 3 days with just a horrible flu. Couldn't move, and I recovered fortunately in time to be able to run the race. But I was at wit's end, and not that I was going to be competitive or make the team anyway, but just being there and having the full experience. So I got 25 miles through the race. There were a number of us struggling. It was kind of a warm day. It was a hot day, if I remember correctly. And they had a meat wagon at the end that was picking up the stragglers if you wanted to ride in. And the way it was set up was if you didn't finish the race in 2.5 hours, and I had already run faster than that, but you didn't finish in 2.5 hours, they were going to have to close the stadium and to run the 5,000 meter final, which again was Prefontaine and George Young and a loaded field. But anyway, we wouldn't get the finish anyway. That was the point. And so I said, well, I want to see that race. And if I'm going to run 26 miles and don't get to run the last 0.2 across the finish line, I'll get in the van now and get me to the stadium so Hayward Field, so I can watch that race. And I stood on the infield and watched that entire race. Interestingly enough, most of the people were cheering for Prefontaine. Of course, he was from Oregon. Anyway,
Sure.
I was yelling for George Young, who was a '68 Olympic bronze medalist in the steeplechase, because he went to the University of Arizona, and I met him when I was out there. So I was a real George Young fan. So that was interesting. Anyway, and George is still alive, by the way. He's in his 80s. He lives out in Arizona. I'm yet to actually personally re-meet him, but I've got to put that on my bucket list. Get out to Arizona and see
That
George
would be a
again.
good thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, the point is, so now I'm a 27-year-old senior at Georgetown. My outdoor eligibility, I'm in my third year. Outdoor eligibility had expired. I knew I was going to go back to the roads in the marathon, 76 being an Olympic year. So the whole year before, I'd started plotting this out. Okay, my goal is to get back into marathoning shape, qualify for the Olympic trials in 76. And get to the trials. And now with all the speed that I had added to my running prowess, who knows? I'd have a shot. We were up against good competition. Frank Shorter had won the Olympics in '72, and he was back. Bill Rogers had set the American record in winning Boston in '75.
Yeah.
Right. And so those two were sort of shoe-ins, and the rest of us were, there to pick up the third spot on the team, hopefully. And so and I knew I was up against a lot of good runners, but that was my hope. That was my goal. And so I took a couple shots at qualifying earlier in the year. They didn't turn out. It wasn't because I wasn't fit. The weather, different aspects sort of conspired against my getting a qualifying time. So I wanted to have Boston out of the way because the trials were in May. Or maybe first week in June, but I only had about 6 weeks after Boston to recover and to run the trials. So I knew if I had to run Boston, if I ran Boston to qualify, it reduced the likelihood I'd be fully recovered and really at the top of my game at the trials. So
you'd be running tired at the trials.
Yeah, I anticipated that would be the case. And that's why I tried to qualify before Boston, but they didn't work out. And so it's interesting, when things don't go our way, it doesn't necessarily spell doom and gloom. Had I already qualified, I would never have run Boston in '76, and I wouldn't have the '76 Boston Marathon title that I have to this day that has benefited me in many tremendous ways still. So we're here talking.
You had a fallback plan. You had a fallback plan that gave you opportunities.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And opportunity, that's the third component in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, The Story of Success, that you need a little bit of DNA, a little natural ability, 10,000 hours of purposeful practice, which Malcolm he did not originate that concept, but he certainly popularized it in his book. But anyway, and then the third opportunity, the intangible, is opportunity, as you said. And I had opportunity to run races when I first got to DC. There were a lot of different places I could have been in the country and had no races to go run. So I'd be training, but without the races to bring me up to that next level, I wouldn't have had. So those opportunities were presented to me there. And now, once again, yes, Boston ended up being the third and final opportunity to qualify for the trials. And it worked out very well. Of course, I didn't make the team. I wasn't fully recovered. The bigger mistake I made, I probably could have been fairly well recovered had I done the right thing after winning Boston and gone back to DC and just really taken it easy. I mean, I'd take my finals and whatnot anyway, but now I was even more psyched that I thought after winning Boston, wow, I really do have a shot at making the team. I started training pretty hard within a couple of weeks. So I put in a couple of weeks of hard training sandwiched between the Boston and the trials, and I just wiped myself out. In hindsight, I realized that, but during that, more was better. It was a very linear concept. The more you're in, the more miles.
If I can pack in more training, I'll perform better.
Exactly. Yeah, we still make that mistake. I mean, I made it off and on throughout my career, and there's not a high level runner that will tell you they haven't done the same thing. It's because it's counterintuitive to back off. It's sort of like downhill skiing. A novice skier, if they start getting out of control and going too fast, their natural instinct is to lean back to try and arrest their speed. but an experienced skier knows to get out over top of your skis and lean forward
lean
so that
forward.
you can rest and gain more control. But it's sort of a counterintuitive thing. Things aren't happening quite as fast when you're doing your training. You have time to sit back and analyze what you're doing. That's where a real good coach comes in. And I was training myself. I was getting advice and counsel from friends who were very successful runners. But if I had it to do over again, that's another thing I probably would do, would be seek out, an objective view of what I'm doing, which is really what a good coach provides.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's not just elite runners. I think it's probably true for for middle of the pack and average athletes. Coaching the Dana Farber Marathon Challenge, you're probably I'm guessing that the big piece of advice you're giving to people is start slow.
Absolutely.
Don't go out too fast.
Yeah, well, in terms of the race specifically, and it's true of every marathon, but even more so at Boston because of the nature of the downhill course that Boston is. It drops 430 feet from start in Hopkinton to Boston, but half of that drop happens in the first few miles. It's tremendously dropped. So you literally have to hold yourself back. People think I'm going to bank time. With the same effort of running flat, I'll run faster downhill. And of course, everyone around you is making the same mistake. So it's very easy to get swept away. And there's a lot of energy in any marathon. You've done all the training, you've rested up for it. So you're supercharged, and the whole field, 90%, 90+% of runners in almost every marathon go out too fast. And the validation of that is they run the second half of their race slower than the first half because they're getting tired, from either dehydration or glycogen depletion or just sheer fatigue, whatever. Sometimes the slowdown happens because you have to take a porta-john, wait for a porta-john to open up, to get in. You lose a couple of minutes there or whatever. But if it's fatigue from one of these legitimate reasons of dehydration, glycogen depletion or whatever, and yet people will still finish the race and say, no, I didn't go out too fast. I felt so easy. One of my axioms that I use to the runners I train is, in that first 10K to maybe even 15K in a marathon, or call it the first third of any race, by and large, if you're running against the clock, which 90+% of the runners in any race are running against the clock, maybe they're competing against one or two others in the race, but only a small percentage of the field are actually running to win the race or win their age group or something like that, right? So
it's a handful out of the thousands.
Right. So they have to take, other kinds of chances. They have to, go out faster than they know they really should to run a perfectly evenly paced race, and therefore minimize the time that they're on the course, basically run the fastest time they could, given the circumstances, given their fitness level and whatnot. But most people are running against the clock. So it behooves you to have a mindset of a time trialist rather than a racer per se. And as such, it's imperative that, and if you do that and you run an evenly paced race where the pace stays even, but the effort to sustain that goes up and up and up, and then starts to increase exponentially as you get into the last quarter, the last 20% of the race. Now at some point, you're finally at wit's end. You can't not run any harder than you are without starting to tighten up, and then you're definitely going to slow down mechanically. So to time that perfectly, if you do, the way you will feel effort-wise, the effort you're putting into your run, the first third of it will feel like you're actually going too slow, like you're holding back. And it's imperative that you feel that way if you are going to run this evenly paced, or even what we call a negative split, a little bit faster over the second half. About 1 to 2% of the field at Boston last year, and almost every marathon, that small of a percentage of the entire field run even or negative splits. Everybody else slows down because they went out too fast. And so, I throw all this stuff at our runners and we still make some mistakes.
But in 1976, you weren't there just looking at time. Take us back to the starting line in 76 and tell us how that race evolved for you. You got to the starting line you were actually wanting a time. You wanted to qualify for the Olympics. Exactly. What happened during the course of that race? How did that evolve?
My goal was to qualify for the trials, for the Olympic trials, and then I had to earn a spot on the Olympic team by finishing the top 3. Anyway, so yes, my mindset, and I had run Boston 3 times before when I was in the Coast Guard, so I knew the course relatively well. I knew it was downhill, but there were no official clocks on the course. I knew that going in, and so there's no way to know where you are nowadays. There's a clock every mile. We all have high tech digital watches that'll beep at you, that talk to you, tell you whether you're on pace, give you heart rate, and really you can monitor every aspect of your race. So there's less of a reason to run off pace, so to speak, but we still do it. But back then, none of that technology existed. I knew there were not clocks on the course. So I reviewed the results from previous years and realized, and I had to run under 2 hours and 20 minutes to get my qualifying time for the trials. So that was my goal. And I hadn't run that fast yet. I knew I was capable of it because my previous marathon was 3 years earlier. And while it wasn't that fast, I was older and a much more mature athlete and a much faster runner at all other shorter distances by light years. So I had no doubt that I could run under 220 on a good day. A good day for me and a good weather day. Weather is always a significant factor in marathoning. So of course it turns out to be not just warm, but crazy hot. It was maybe the beginning of climate change. It was April. We're in the middle of April, and it turns out to be, we were in a heat spell on the East Coast for the whole weekend, so we knew it was coming. We knew it was there. But it was literally 96 degrees at the noontime start of the Boston Marathon that year. Just crazy hot. But my mindset was such, I had already run the numbers, and now I knew it was going to be hot. So I felt that under ideal circumstances, I was somewhere in the mid-teens, maybe a 2:15, something like that. But to run my time, in the previous years, the top 10, everybody in the top 10 on a good year was under 220. So I said, just get yourself into the top 10. And whatever happens after that, if I'm in contention, for the top 3 or the number 1 spot, that'll be great. And I'll address that when that happens. But I'm not going to put the pressure on myself of having to do that. Just get into the sweet spot. Let the race work for me, and get me through, because my primary goal was to get my qualifying time. My secondary goal was where I placed in the race. And I thought anywhere in the top 10 was going to be pretty good. I mean, I was 27 years old, but I knew my mindset was I had many more years to come back to Boston. And if I get in the top 10 and get my qualifying time, I get to the trials, I'll come back then with a focus on where I place in the race.
Sure.
So that's my overall.
Get some experience.
Exactly.
Come back stronger and better.
Right. And so there was also a B standard to qualify for the trials. You could, if you're in a 223 or faster, but not under 220, you could go to the trials. You just had the U.S. Olympic Committee would not pay for your expenses. So I wasn't even worried about any of that. So my mindset was I want to get under 220, because going into the trials race, I want to know I had at least an A standard. If I eked in on a B standard, those were people who were, truly, we're going to let them get some experience, but they're not going to be contenders, right? So the mindset itself was part of that. But so with the heat at Boston, I figured, okay, look, I have a cushion of another 3 minutes. If the heat costs me 6 minutes and I'm in 2:15 shape, I run a 2:21, I've got my qualifying time. So just stay relaxed. So I didn't let the heat affect my mindset at all. And consequently, going in, and I was just supremely confident that I was going to be able to utilize the race to get my time. And in the process, I had already had inklings of a certain mindset through my competitive years. And competition is a double-edged sword. And it motivates us to do training that we otherwise wouldn't do in preparation for the competition. But then you get into the race, and the night before, and then you get lined up for the race, and you start to awfulize the situation, wondering all the what ifs and stuff. And if you're fearful of your competition, you're racing somebody that you raced before and they beat you, you don't know if you can do it, or if you had some success and now the expectation is that you have to match that. So these are all the negative aspects of competition that are there. They may or may not affect one's mindset and therefore performance. They almost do to everybody to varying degrees and various degrees of repetition. Some people are consumed by it, and I'll get to more of that a little bit later on in our talk if we have time. But anyway, my mindset was there because of everything I just said. All my competitors in that race were now, in my mindset, my allies. The faster they ran, the faster I was likely to run. So I didn't want them to stumble or fall or have a bad race, so it would increase my likelihood of me having a higher place finish. That's the typical mindset in a competition. I don't care if they trip or fall. It doesn't matter. I just want to beat them, whatever it takes, short of cheating. Although now cheating is part of that mindset too. People are so intent on winning that they'll do anything to win, right? And that's a whole other conversation as well.
Yeah, right. And that's
but anyway,
that's an attitude we want to steer away.
We do, yeah. But and again, we could have a whole conversation of books. Books have been written about it. And anyway, so my mind.
It's the balance of process versus outcome.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And as has been said, too much focus on the outcome will contaminate your the process. Or excuse me, too much focus on the outcome will contaminate your performance. And it does. It does. And so
tighten up.
You start to awfulize when all of a sudden your mind you're in the middle of your game, whatever it happens to be, and you start seeing that the outcome that I was anticipating happening, winning or whatever it is not going to happen. Then we may start to panic, we start tightening up, whatever, and then we become our own worst enemy, get in our own way, and make it even worse than it might otherwise be. So
awfulize is a word you created out of the word awful?
Well, I didn't create it. I borrowed it. All my expressions I've borrowed or stolen from other people. Awfulize actually was a word I learned in a book titled Minding the Body, Mending the Mind. By the author was Joan Borisenko. And she was an understudy of Herb Benson, who was at Beth Israel Hospital here in Beth Israel Deaconess here in Boston. He developed what's called the Mind Body Clinic. He's a cardiologist and did the early research on the benefits or the effects of if they were looking for benefits, it would be a biased view. Their hypothesis was just, does transcendental meditation have a physiological benefit, provide a physiological benefit? And through their research, they discovered it did. And so Herb Benson, being a cardiologist, was so fascinated with the results they came up with, he devoted the rest of his medical career to exploring this whole concept. And then one of his understudies was Joan Borisenko. As she was working on her PhD, her experiences through that are elaborated in this first book she wrote, Minding the Body, Mending the Mind. And she used the word awfulize to describe what we tend to do. We awfulize situations. We make them worse in our mind than they really would otherwise be. I loved it, so I've used that, and I'm glad to be able to give her credit for where that word came from. But anyway, so we awfulize it. Back to the starting line of the Boston Marathon, your original question, my mindset, I was not anxious at all out of fear that these other guys were likely to beat me. It was the faster they ran, the faster I was going to run. So that's, an inverse of what one usually is thinking of at the beginning of competition. We turn around and shake our opponent's hands and say good luck, but we really don't want them to have the best game that they've got in them, right, against us. We should, so that if we do beat them, we know we beat them at their best. Number two, they are going to present the greatest challenge to us, which is really what we should be pursuing. We want the greatest challenge because that's what's going to raise our game to the highest level. And we have an equal responsibility to the game to put forth our best performance so as to give them the greatest challenge, which will in turn present them with an opportunity to raise the level of their game. And it's really all about improvement. Getting better. That's what athletes across the board really are pursuing. Improvement, to get better day by day by day, week by week, month by month, season by season. Through a career, we want to continue to improve. If you stick in a game long enough, whether it's a game like golf that you can play until you're 80, and people run until they're 80 as well, starting when they're 20 maybe. But at some point, age will take over in any game and start slowing us down. Now we have age-graded tables that you can say, well, yeah, I'm 50 years old, but I'm running the equivalent of a faster time than I did when I was 30. So we can kind of play games with that stuff, and it's a good thing to do because, again, we're pursuing improvement. But so anyway, I continue to.
So bring us to the middle of the race. You were following the lead pack up until Wellesley, and then what began to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I probably wasn't in the top 100, in the first mile, or maybe, in the back of the pack for sure. And they were running away, and because it was so hot, I knew better than to go out with the leaders, and I let them go. It would sort itself out. I had run enough marathons now or long distance races to know that, the field usually goes out a little faster than it should, and then it settles in, and then it comes back. So I sat back, and again, there were not only were there no clocks on the course, there were almost no water stops either. A few card tables out with whatever, but they weren't set up at designated areas, so you didn't know where they were anyway. But the spectators all on the course had set up garden hoses, and the kids were running out handing out oranges and cups of water, and I was taking on everything. I was just staying absolutely soaked. I jokingly used to say I probably ran 27 miles, zigzagging back and forth across, literally running off the road from times into people's yard to run into the garden hose they had set up on a step ladder as a shower, and soak myself off. I'd invest 10 seconds to do that, run back, but I had the refreshment from it. So I never really got into trouble heat-wise. And so, yes, finally I started passing a lot of people. They were slowing down. I wasn't accelerating. I was just running the pace I knew to run. And we finally got to Wellesley, which is the halfway point in the race, distance-wise. It's not, the halfway point energy-wise in a marathon is somewhere between 18 and 20 miles. But distance-wise, I got to the halfway point, and finally now we had all spread out, things were thinned out, and I could see the runners ahead of me on the longer stretches of road, and there was an official or an unofficial a counter there, somebody with his ball cap and a clipboard, and he yelled out to me, "You're in 10th place." So that was the first time I got notice of where I was in the race. And again, as I said, at about that same time, I could see the whole lead string of runners out ahead of me by a half a mile or so. So I thought, I was thinking top 10. I'm now in the top 10. And I had just been lollygagging. I felt, effort-wise, I was just really taking it easy. I knew the effort was going to come later in the race. So I was intentionally holding myself back. And again, running against the clock. I was running a time trial here in my mind. And again, not intimidated by the competitive field I was in. And there were some good guys there. All the guys still in front of me, I didn't know at the time. I learned afterwards. A lot of them had come from hot weather climates. The next three finishers all had come out of hot weather climates, second, third, and fourth place finishers in that race. Anyway, so I just continued running the same pace, and they were now paying for their imprudent, quicker start. And they were starting to string out, and they were now running by themselves, and it was still hot, and they're starting to struggle. And with the limited aid out there, they were starting to pay a big price. And now I was starting to just flourish. I was feeling great. And now I just started picking these guys off one at a time. I intentionally had to hold back and not go after them. There was still a lot of race to run. So I just kept running the same pace the whole way. And finally I'm in fourth place. And somebody yelled out to me, and I'm about the 17-mile mark now in front of the Newton Wellesley Hospital, and somebody yells out, "You're in fourth place." And in fact, Bill Squires, who was the coach of the Greater Boston Track Club,
sure, the famous
Bill Squires, yes. I had not yet met him, but I knew who he was. And he ran out, and I must have seen photographs of him because I recognized him when he ran out in the street, and he was running alongside me. He had a handful of ice cubes. He said, "Here, hold these, rub these on your arm, they'll cool you off." And I thought, that's a good idea. And I did. I was rubbing, just holding the ice cubes in my hand and rubbing them, and they felt very good. And they had melted down almost completely when I caught the two guys in front of me who were running second and third at the time. And I remember turning and handing the ice cubes to one of them, and said, "Here, you need some ice cubes." And part of it was to be a good sport. But the other part was there was a mindset, here, you need these and I don't any longer, that kind of thing. So there's a little bit of that competitive juice was still there, of course. But again, I wasn't feeling at all threatened by any of these guys. And now even less so, because I'm passing them and I'm still feeling very, very good. So we turned the corner. There's a 90-degree turn. Now, everybody who's run the Boston Marathon knows the famous Newton Firehouse. 17 and the quarter mile mark, 17 and a half. And I turned the corner, and now you start up the second hill. Actually, it's considered the first of the three Newton hills, but it's actually the second hill, us having already run over the first one from 16-mile mark. Anyway, I looked up, and there was the leader, Richard Mabuza from Swaziland. He had been leading the entire race, he was a 2:12 marathoner, so he was very legit from the previous year, and he'd been leading the entire race. He's comes out of a hot weather climate. He's an experienced marathoner. They all figured nobody's going to catch him now because everybody else is dying. Else had already dropped off. But I was coming from so far back, they didn't see me until they finally did see me, right? And I'm thinking, okay, I've got to sneak up.
You were the dark horse on the course that day.
Say again.
The dark horse on the course.
Yes, well, that's good. I like that. Yes. So anyway, I noticed that Mabuza was not running the tangent. He was on the wide side, and the road makes a turn to the left a little bit, and so I immediately, instinctively, headed it for the left-hand corner of that turn, that bend in the road, to run the tangent. And he was still running the wide angle, and so I deduced from this he's a little delirious. He's not thinking straight, or he would have run the tangent as well. Why would you run the wide turn? And as it turns out, and then Will Clooney, the race director at the time, was on the bus. There was a big press bus right there, and they had put a big sign on it, by the way, it said "Hose the runners." That's why the race became known as the Run for the Hoses. Anyway, so Will Clooney looked back, he saw me come, and he had a megaphone, and he yells to no one in particular in the megaphone. And I'm trying to sneak up on Mabuza. It was the old track tactic. You don't want to let them know you're coming, and you want to blow by them and discourage. Not give them any encouragement to jump on your back. And so that was going through my mind as well. Even though he was my ally, right? I still didn't want to give him any overt help. I wasn't going to get in his way, but nonetheless, that was in my mindset. That Clooney yells out, "Make way! There's another runner coming." I'm thinking, "Oh no, you're blowing my cover here." Well, it turned out exactly, yeah. Well, it turned out it didn't matter. So when I got up beside Mabuza. Now, as I said, I ran the tangent, so we were on opposite sides of the road. This is Comm Ave, so it's pretty wide boulevard. And I looked over at him. He looked at me, and as a competitive athlete, you normally think, take that. You're driving another one. You're the final punch that you're putting somebody down, but it wasn't that at all. I looked at him, and I've been in that situation. Every competitive runner has been at one time or another, where you're running well, you think you're going to win, and then the wheels fall off. And what happened, and now you're powerless, and all you're trying to do is get to the finish. And that was what was happening to him, and I knew that instinctively. I calculated all that just with the meat of our eyes, and I remember feeling empathy, nothing but empathy for the poor guy. I said, "Oh my God, I've been there." And well, hang in there and do the best you can. And I'm on. I've got to keep running here. So as I did, but by that time, because of all the garden hoses we were running under, my number had curled up. I cut it down into just two little digits. Interestingly enough, I had number 14, bib number 14, which was the same number Bill Rogers, who had won the year before, had on. So it was just pure coincidence, but whatever, sign from the stars. And but it had curled up, so it was invisible. I thought it had actually tore off, but regardless, you couldn't see it. All I had was Georgetown on my singlet, and so they weren't able to identify me. They go down, I caught up with not only that bus, but there was the photography truck wasn't a nice big elaborate thing like they are these days. It was an old pickup truck with scaffolding built around the back side of the pickup, and there were probably 10 photographers on the bus, and most of them had already run out of film. They're all shooting most of them black and white film. A few of them were shooting color, I guess, but and most of them had run out of film, and they were kind of having a party.
It looks like we have run out of. Looks like Jack has dropped off here, but we will try to get Jack back on here. In the meantime, let me fill in and talk a bit more about what we're doing. Like I said at the beginning, this is the inaugural nuBound podcast interview. Jack was our guest today. We're looking to do these fairly regularly. Bring on athletes, bring on people with experience in nutrition. What we're looking to do is provide some education, provide some perspective, give people a sense of what's possible how they can improve their lives. So improve their physical performance, improve their nutrition performance, and use that as a tool. It looks like we have Jack back here.
So I was sitting outside, and I thought my computer battery was fully charged, and it wasn't. Anyway,
Talk about running out of batteries.
Exactly, yeah. So this time I did. Anyway, let's see, get a little bit of light on the subject here. So here we are. All right. So
yeah, and we're kind of we're kind of getting to the end here, but it would be great to wrap up the story and find out what happened between passing Mabuza.
Yeah, so they didn't know my name. They were trying to, they were yelling off the photography truck, trying to guess my name, and I'm still feeling absolutely, I'm feeling great. I'm not feeling any fatigue at all. So this is a nice little diversion. We're chatting and I wouldn't tell them my name. They're yelling, "Who are you? Who are you?" And I wouldn't tell them. It's their job to guess to figure this out. They didn't have to go very far down the list to see somebody a runner affiliated with Georgetown. So anyway, that because I'd registered it without affiliation. So finally, the guy who figured it out was Jeff Johnson, who was the first employee for Nike. Yeah, interestingly enough, and he was running their East Coast operation, selling shoes and whatnot. And he was an amateur photographer, still is. I think he's moved back. I think he's originally from New Hampshire, and I think he's back there now. Great guy, and he figured it out. And initially, they thought my roommate and the initial guy I met at Georgetown when I was in the Coast Guard and running on the roads down there, as I mentioned earlier, was a guy named Justin Gubbins, and he was my first contact, to Georgetown, and therefore how I got in. And he was a road runner. He was from New York, Long Island, and he was known throughout New England as a pretty good road runner. So so the road running world knew Justin as being from Georgetown, and so they were yelling, "Oh, you're Justin Gubbins, Justin," which I said Justin would like that, and actually. It's a long story. We don't have time now. I had seen Justin the month before. He and I ran a marathon together on Long Island. I dropped out of it because the weather conditions were so horrendous there because of wind, not heat, that I knew we weren't going to get our qualifying time. So I dropped out at 18. He went on to win the race. And that's part of why I think he didn't come to Boston that year. So anyway, so because having beaten me a month before.
He ran the race, he got tired, and he got his rest. Unlike you after Boston going into the Olympic trials.
Yeah, presumably. I think he did run the trials. I can't remember now, but regardless. So anyway, so now they identified me and I'm running along and I'm feeling great still. And, about 22 miles, my calves started to cramp a little bit. So I had to back off and I panicked a little. I had that brief moment of panic thinking, oh no, someone's now maybe has been tracking me through and is going to catch me. But immediately what came back was, hey, if I get my qualifying time, somebody runs a better race than me and beats me, and I get second or third or whatever, I still have accomplished my primary goal. I've come darn close to my secondary goal of winning this thing, and at least now I know I can contend. And if I have to come back a future year, to get my win, so be it. And just that mindset was enough to enable me to stay at a slightly slower pace and stay relaxed in the process. And by the time I got down onto Beacon Street, the bottom of the hills, my calves had relaxed, and I don't remember ever thinking about them again. I just started running again, and then now the spectators were yelling, there's no one behind you, no one in sight. So it helped keep me just running along, doing what I do. And as I've said before, I got to the finish line. I just stopped because the race was over. I was still feeling like I could keep on going. I probably was close to the end for myself, but nonetheless. So the two halves of my race were 17 seconds apart. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know till long afterwards. I didn't even know what my finishing time was for a long time. But and such was the nature of Boston back then. But anyway, so it all worked out, and it changed my life, of course, very much for the better. But with that title, as I say, with what you get with success is responsibility. To have to come back and do it again, or to pay it forward, or whatever. And I've been very blessed. fast forward, a lot of things happened after that. I finally graduated from Georgetown. 3 years later, I moved up to the Boston area at Bill Rogers' invitation, actually. And I was hoping to go into business with him. And his idea was I'd probably go to work for his company. And anyway, that end of it never worked out. Bill and I are still great friends. We're in touch with each other more now than ever before. And but I was here as my new home. And I was getting ready for the 79 Boston race. I'd run my PR in 78 to 11 and was hoping to put it all together and win one in a fast time. And I was ready to do that in 79. I thought at least to be in contention. And I cracked my tibia about 6 weeks before the race, so I never got to run it in 79. Anyway, but I was here and have been ever since. And 10 years after that, got connected with the Dana Farber Cancer Institute. That's a story longer than we have time to share.
Yeah, but, yeah. Hey, and maybe we can come back and finish the story at some point in the future. It'd be good to talk a bit more about Dana Farber, because that's really, winning the Boston Marathon's a success story, but raising $100 million for cancer research, that's a success story too.
That is. I'm only one of the players in that entire enterprise, but yeah, I feel tremendously proud to be part of it. And it's an incredible story and worthy of being told.
And you've got you're over 500 people are raising funds for the charity.
Yes, that's true. We have, we started off in 1990 with 19 runners, and most of them running the race as bandits. We had a few running official races and stuff. A lot of people today don't know what that term means, but it's just people ran in the back of the race without an official entry or entrant. And because of the nature of Boston being what it is, you having to qualify, and there were no charity programs back then, well, right around in the early 90s is when it started officially, and there was kind of an unofficial program whereby the BAA, Boston Athletic Association, gave some entries to a few nonprofit organizations that were affiliated with some of their sponsors. So that was the early roll into this whole thing. And finally, I think it was 94, they finally made it truly official. But there were already some organizations doing it. And we, Dana Farber, were one of those organizations. And so we continued to grow through the process and grew from a small, I think our first year we maybe had 100 entrants, 100 bib numbers from the Boston Athletic Association. And that has now grown to, 500. We're the largest team in the whole charity organization. And so consequently, we raised the most money. But for a long time, we had the highest per runner average of funds raised as well. I think, because of it's a testament to the organization and the people that run it. And actually, my wife is the director of running programs at Dana Farber now, so we get to work on that together. And a testament to her organizational skills and her staff's hard work that make it what it is. This year being different, of course, because of COVID. The thousands and thousands of organizations that use athletic events to raise money are hurting tremendously. Some more than others. We were only 5 weeks away from our event, so a lot of our money was already in for this year. But I suspect this is going to go on for another year or more. So who knows where that is all going to lead. But back to us, with 100 million in, a lot of very beneficial research has happened, and with successful outcomes. And there are pharmaceuticals in play today based on this basic innovative research that we fund. And 100% of the money that our runners raise goes to the research program. And it's a very novel, unique type of research program whereby they fund the young scientists who have great ideas but don't have a track record, and they're not going to get NIH funding or other funding because they don't have the track record to really get that. There's national organizations that fund research. They want a high success rate. So
making a bet on the future.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the money we raise is used by these young researchers to really build their labs and get their novel ideas underway. And everyone doesn't hit, but it's, again, use the photography metaphor. We're talking about Jeff Johnson. You take 100 photographs for the one that really works out. So it's a little bit of a gunshot approach, but not completely. They don't just blast it out. Every project is vetted very, very well and has to show tremendous promise before they're going to put money behind it. But
Hmm.
anyway, it's really good stuff.
Good. And I think the field of runners, the people in the program, something like over half of them are first time marathoners. Is that the right range?
It depends year to year, and the interesting, the novel years, the year 2000, which was the millennial, or 96, which was the 100th running of Boston. A lot of people who had run the year before come back and want to duplicate. So we have
Sure.
fewer new timers there. But on a conventional year, almost 60% of our runners each year are running their first marathon. Certainly the first on our team, but a lot of those
Yeah.
people, again, are running their first marathon as well. So, which is kind of novel for Boston because the largest part of the field have to qualify, which means they run not just one marathon, but a lot of marathons, probably over a number of years, to work up to being able to get that qualifying time.
Absolutely, a lot of people spend years getting a Boston qualifying time.
Yeah, yeah. But we tell our runners too, they shouldn't feel like second-class citizens, and some of them might, or they'll bring that up, but say, look, you're earning the right to be here and to run this race as an official participant, just like everybody else, just in a different way. And the good that you're doing for whatever organization you're running for, there are a lot of really valuable charitable organizations out there doing real good work with the money that they raise, and so they're earning the right to do that. Plus, they do the training. They do a lot more physical preparation over a 4-month period than they otherwise would as well. So it moves the marker for a lot of those, for all of them, I think, in many positive ways.
That's the distinction between success and victory.
Yeah.
None of them are going to win the race, but
exactly,
they're going to succeed nonetheless.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I taught sports psychology at Tufts for 27 years or so, and that was one of the tenets of the curriculum that I taught, is making that distinction between success and victory. And in the pursuit of victory, we sometimes find success, but sometimes not. Whereas if you pursue success, define it in a way, it may or may not include outright victory, which is just which is beating everybody else. But that's a function of who shows up on that day sometimes as well. When I came back and ran Boston in '77 as a defending champion, I ran almost the same time I did from the year before. It was another hot year, not as hot, but warm. But I only finished 9th place. And when I was asked, well, what happened? You ran the same time. Why didn't you win? I said, hey, this year 8 guys ran faster than me. And if they hadn't been here, I would have won again. So any athlete can put out a certain performance. And some sports lend themselves to this: golf or skiing or ice skating or gymnastics. You do your performance, everybody else does theirs, and then you kind of compare the scores. Other events like football and basketball and baseball and running, you all do it together, and it's last man standing, so to speak, ends up being the victor, and that can change from day to day. So there are a lot of other things that go into victory itself, but and in a mass participation event, how many people were actually going to be first, finish first. One, exactly, right. And then in each division, perhaps. But does that mean everybody else is a loser? By the pure definition of winning at all cost, one can make that argument. Of course, nobody does. It's kind of an absurd notion. But if you don't let that notion contaminate what you're out there all about, that's what they say, that everybody can be a victor. Everybody can win their own race.
You can find your own success.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. So that's an important message, I think, especially to instill in younger kids. And again, some will argue, well, that's gone a little too far, so we're giving every kid an award afterwards. Well, every kid deserves to be acknowledged and rewarded in some manner, so that they're going to take the next step rather than bail out and give up on it. A lot of my students at Tufts were like that. They got out of the sports that they were very good at in high school because of the pressures of the competition. And what happened? And it was still just all about winning now. Kids get into sports because of the love of the game and the joy of the play and improving and all of that. And then as soon as we wrap it, plug it into a competitive structure, things happen for better and for worse. And that goes back to what I said earlier about competition being a double-edged sword. And I think properly, if somebody's never been on a motorcycle and you get on the back of somebody takes you for a ride and they take you out for a nice leisurely 20-mile-an-hour stroll around the block, say, wow, that was fun. Let's do it again. But if they take you out on the highway at 80 miles an hour, whoa, I'm never getting on those things again. And so when kids get introduced to competition, and all of a sudden very quickly it becomes not about going out, having fun, trying your best, doing the best you can. Let's see if we can be better today than we were yesterday. It's about beating somebody else and getting something for it, which are two extrinsic dimensions of the game. So they become by far the most salient components. Beat everybody else and get something for it. So those become the driving forces, like students trying to get a good grade as opposed to acquire knowledge. The grade will come if you learn the subject. Yeah,
but those are the things, if you're aiming for lifelong fitness, if you're looking to use fitness as a tool to live your best life over the course of your life, and you're competitive maybe in an open competition in your 20s, maybe some in your 30s, a handful into their 40s, but beyond that, being fit and competing is about maximizing where you are in life and keeping your health at an optimum.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the type of sport you might play plays a role in that. Some activities are lifelong sports, right? But it's easy to transition. Just about every sport, might have some running involved, so you can get into running or jogging or just going out brisk walking. Yeah, lifelong fitness is critically important. Some people who don't participate in sports when they're younger, hopefully get turned on to exercise as a part of their daily living. And it really is critically important.
And it's something. You can be an adult onset athlete, and you can start at any age, learn new skills, develop new strengths, new speed, and that will extend your life.
It will. And even more importantly, we usually get into, and when you read anything about exercise and nutrition, how important it is, especially through the aging process, that one of the cornerstones of that is this idea of extending life. It will possibly extend your life. One of the notions in running itself, which is apropos here, is that it may not add life or years to your life, but it will definitely add life to your years. So it enhances the quality of your daily living, even if it doesn't extend the number of years you're around. You have the likelihood of feeling a lot more fulfilled, and you can make more contributions to fellow man if you're put yourself in the position to be able to do that.
No, absolutely. Walking around the last 10 years of your life is much to be preferred to being in a wheelchair the last 10 years of your life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about that. So.
Okay. Well, Jack, I'm going to step in and stop this because we're going on, and the two of us will never stop conversing if we keep going.
Right.
Let me say thank you very much for participating, for being our inaugural interview guest here.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. I mean, it was great. I really enjoyed it. You're right. I mean, we kind of knew going into this that we could sit here and chat for 3 hours because we've done it. We've done it ourselves, and still at the end of those, we realize we haven't covered all the bases. So
we realized we've just begun starting, and we've got more open topics than we began with.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing, I guess, right?
Well, we will come back and do it again.
I look forward to it, and in the interim, I'm sure you and I will connect once again with our masks or sitting distantly across the table from one another, having a good beer or whatever, and sharing more great stories. So, but thanks a million for having me, Mark. I really appreciate it, and hopefully the viewers will, we turn on some lights, maybe, generate some questions, and that's really what this is all about too.
It is, absolutely.
All right.
Great.
Okay. Thanks again.
Thanks again. Bye-bye. So once again, this is Mark Connell. I wanted to say thanks to everybody for being with us this afternoon or being with us this morning. I guess it's morning still here in Boston and much earlier on the West Coast. Thanks for being here. We've got some other great guests coming up, which we will publicize in the days to come. Thank you, and have a great weekend.